Your PS5 is getting a huge upgrade in 2023. A new PlayStation console was just teased and it's not the PS5 Slim. January's PS Plus games are here and they're great, and Death Stranding 2's release date may have already leaked. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to PSReady. This is the first news video of 2023 and I'm glad you're here. We're just gonna get started with the first news story, which is that a bunch of PlayStation 5 games release dates may have been leaked thanks to the art station of someone named Frank Alberti. So the reason this leak is kind of noteworthy is because Alberti is a senior artist over at PlayStation Visual Arts, which means he touches a lot of games in the PS5 ecosystem. So to see these games on his art station with generalized release dates, you can see why those are pretty believable. So the first one is Firewall Ultra. This is a PSVR game. We know this is coming in 2023. The second one is Death Stranding 2, or DS2 as it's being called now. I was actually pretty excited about how quickly Kojima turned around the first Death Stranding from when it was announced. That game had a pretty quick dev cycle, especially when you compare it to a lot of his other games. I think I was there when it was announced at PlayStation Experience, but if I wasn't there at the actual announcement, if it wasn't announced there, I saw something get revealed. I think it was a new trailer, and I ended up buying a cool vinyl of the Low Roar track that was in the trailer, and I was so excited for that game from that trailer going forward. You can kind of see why the dev cycle on that game was so short compared to something like, I don't know, Horizon or Spider-Man or any of the other bigger PlayStation IPs, mainly because the gameplay is so focused and light. The combat is not the biggest thing in the game. You're kind of actually supposed to avoid it. It's kind of like Metal Gear in that way. And also the main gameplay conceit is walking across the map. So you can kind of see why the dev cycle is so short. I had my fingers crossed that we would see the same situation with Death Stranding 2, and having it turned around by 2024 from announcement is pretty cool. I mean, we're only going to be waiting at maximum 2 years if it does hit that 2024 release date, because Death Stranding 2, if you're not counting when Norman Reedus leaked that game was already basically shot for him, it was announced at the Game Awards in 2022. So at maximum, a 2-year turnaround if they hit that 2024 release date. And then the most interesting thing on this list of leaks is an untitled first-person shooter, which is also slated for 2024. And honestly, I feel like this has got to be coming from Guerrilla. We know that one of the leads of Rainbow Six Siege went over to Guerrilla Games. We know that they're working on multiple games at the same time, some in the Horizon universe, some not. I wouldn't really put any money on it being Killzone just because I feel like that IP, I don't think it ever really was as popular as Sony wanted it to be, and Guerrilla Games having a competitive first-person shooter could be really cool for them. We also know that Sony owns Bungie now, so whatever this dude is working on could be Bungie's new game that's going to be a competitive game, not, or maybe in the Destiny universe. It's not totally confirmed, but it's good to see that Sony has an FPS on their official slate for PlayStation Visual Arts, because they're kind of missing that. You can't really count Destiny. They keep that totally separate from the rest of the PlayStation IP, and they didn't create that game. So yeah, I'm assuming this is for Guerrilla. Regardless, I'm excited about the quick turnaround on Death Stranding 2, and I'm excited to see a first-person shooter from Sony. Next up, let's talk about Silent Hill, because there's a really weird situation going on with this franchise. So we got a bunch of games announced just a few months ago at the Silent Hill broadcast. It was Silent Hill 2 Remake, Silent Hill Ascension, Silent Hill Townfall, and Silent Hill F. The interesting thing is there has been another leaked title that's been popping up for months now, well before any of these other games leaked, called Silent Hill The Short Message. And it kind of went away, and people assumed that maybe it was just a different name for one of the games that was already announced, but it looks like it's a completely different game, and we're not going to have to wait long to see it because it was just rated on the Taiwanese ratings board. We also got a logo with this leak though, and I think it's pretty cool. Obviously, it's hard to tell what it actually is. It looks like it's a bunch of blood on the wall, which gets me excited as a huge survival horror fan. I just hope that they don't release this around the same time as Dead Space, because that game is all I will be playing in January as far as survival horror goes. I cannot wait for that, but it looks like we won't have long to wait to figure out what this Silent Hill game is. I like Silent Hill. I experienced it first through the movie, which I think is criminally underrated. I've been playing through Silent Hill 2 on my Steam Deck. There's an enhanced edition you can get on PC that looks pretty good. The controls definitely are dated, so I'm extremely excited for that remake of Silent Hill 2, and I like some of these other concepts they have going on in that universe. But honestly, I really want to know what's going on with Metal Gear, and I really want to know what's going on with Castlevania. Eric Williams Abrams, the director of God of War, he was on a podcast after God of War Ragnarok came out, and he basically threw out there that the game he wants to direct the most is something in the Castlevania universe. I would love to see that happen. Sony obviously just needs to pick up Konami if possible, or get some exclusive deal like they have with Silent Hill 2 Remake going on with Castlevania, because I want to see Sony Santa Monica's take on Castlevania. I think that franchise could totally do something awesome with that formula that they've already built with God of War 2018 and God of War Ragnarok. We also saw in Bluepoint's Christmas card that they had 4 presents. All of them had games that they had previously worked on, and then the 4th present had nothing. So people are kind of like, what is that new game that Bluepoint is working on? We've of course heard a ton of leaks about Metal Gear Solid over the past few months, whether it's an HD collection, whether it's a remake of the first game, whether it's a remake of Metal Gear Solid 3. Something is definitely happening with that franchise as well. I just hope we again see it sooner rather than later. But just judging by how things have been going with Silent Hill, I think any of the marquee games that come out of either Castlevania or Metal Gear Solid, those will be PlayStation 5 exclusives. We've heard news stories that Sony just straight up blocks these games on the Xbox ecosystem, so that's why you're not seeing games like Final Fantasy VII Remake, and presumably it's why you won't see games like Silent Hill 2's remake coming out on Xbox either. I mean, for me personally, I don't really care. I have a PS5, I have a PC, I'll play all of these games on either one of those devices. I just hope that Sony figures out a way to get these games out and make them good, because, you know, Konami, they're not really known for making the best stuff over the past few years, and I feel like they got to come out and remind us why they are coming back to games and why they are one of the biggest and coolest publishers that people kind of don't like anymore, obviously because of what happened with Kojima, but I'd like to see some new stuff from them nonetheless. I like that they're doing remakes for Metal Gear and starting out there, because their last original game after Kojima left was Metal Gear Survive, and that game was horrible. I bought it for $5 on PlayStation 4, and it's just straight garbage. I mean, even though it has that fluid Metal Gear Solid 5 combat and great graphics, it just doesn't really work. So long story short, we'll keep an eye on Silent Hill, the short message. It should be out sooner rather than later. I'm kind of curious about this one. Now let's talk about games you can play right now, because we got the essential games for PlayStation Plus for January, and once again, Sony is on an upswing here with great games that are definitely worth checking out. So the first one, I could see why maybe some people would feel like it's kind of a cop-out game, but I think it's a great inclusion nonetheless. It's Jedi Fallen Order, which is one of the best games ever, like of the past generation, probably in my top 5 games, I would say, and definitely when it comes to Star Wars games, I'm pretty sure it's my favorite Star Wars game ever. I absolutely love it. It's just been so cheap so many times because they came out with that free PS5 upgrade and Series X upgrade. They made the game $5 or $10 multiple times. It's one of the best selling games on the PlayStation 4 and 5 pretty much across the board, so I'm assuming most of you already have it, but if you don't, you are being rewarded for holding out, because it is one of the free games that you can just go download right now, because these become available on January 3rd, which is when you're seeing this video. The next game you're getting is Axiom Verge 2, which is a Metroidvania. It's a sequel to Axiom Verge. I've heard that this one is kind of a step down from the first game, but in a lot of ways it also does improve over it. I haven't gotten the time to play it just yet, just because there are so many games coming out all the time. Like, we were talking about how 2022 was sort of a dead year for games, and still I feel like I had way too many games to play, so I haven't really gotten my hands on this one yet. I feel like it is kind of the perfect PS Plus game though. It's not really the type of game where I would take a huge risk on it and spend the money, and I feel like if I waited for it to be $5 or whatever, the developer isn't getting that much money for me. So yeah, I feel like PS Plus is the perfect place for a game like this to end up, and I've heard that you can beat it in pretty much a weekend. So if you're really into Metroidvanias, like you recently played Shovel Knight or something like that, this is definitely one that's worth checking out. And I guess the most controversial game on this list and most surprising game to see would be Fallout 76. This game's been out for a while, and I'll be honest, I was addicted to this game for a very long time. I got it at launch, and obviously it was just such a mess that I didn't play it, but I didn't refund it at the time, so I hung on to it and I waited for it to improve. And then during 2020 is where that game really hit its stride with the Wastelanders update that basically added in a whole new story. It added in dialogue choices, it added in daily repeatable missions, it added in factions. It was just a really cool update. And then after that, it was like, man, we waited way too long to get new content for the game, so I sort of fell off of it. I've wanted to go back to it to try out the new Pit Expedition, which I've heard is really good. And I know that Double 11, I'm pretty sure, picked up development for new stuff coming to the game in the future. So Bethesda can focus on Starfield and the Elder Scrolls 6, which honestly seems like a smart smart move. Regardless, there is a ton of content in this game, and it's such a big improvement on the base building system introduced in Fallout 4. I enjoyed so much moving my camp across the map in this game and building all sorts of different houses, and there is that subscription service that comes along with it, Fallout First, but the cool thing is you don't really need it, and having this game for free added to your PlayStation account, there's really not much extra content to pay for outside of stuff in the Atom Shop, which is basically like new building materials and new things to place in your camp and cosmetic skins for weapons and your characters. So I think this is definitely worth trying out if you're a Fallout fan, or if you played it at launch and decided to return it to the store or something like that. I think, again, this is a great game that's worth checking out. It's come a long way. As far as essential games go, I would say this is a banger month. We've got a really solid indie title. We've got a multiplayer online game that doesn't have a ton of DLC to purchase. So it's not a situation like Injustice or Mortal Kombat 10 where they put the game on there and then none of the DLC comes with it. That's always super frustrating. And then also you've got one of the best Star Wars games of all time. So we are officially in 2023. There are only 24 days at the time I'm recording this until I can get my hands on the DualSense Edge, and man, am I excited for that controller. And then right around the corner after that in February is the PSVR2. But Sony allegedly is already looking at some sort of upgrade for that headset that could come a lot sooner than I think people would expect. So the weirdest thing with the PSVR2 is the fact that it always has to be plugged into the PlayStation 5. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing because it has one single cable versus the whole mess of a situation the original PSVR 1 had. And when you look at something like its biggest competition, the Oculus Quest 2, if you want to take advantage of the full graphical power of your PC to play VR games, you need to do the same thing. You need a really long USB-C cable that can go from your PC all the way into your headset, and it's got to be one of those Thunderbolt 3 cables, so it actually can get pretty pricey. So as far as the competition goes, I think it's basically one-to-one in the sense that yes, to get the most power out of the competition, you need to have that headset plugged in. But the big leg up the Oculus Quest 2 has over the PlayStation VR 2 is the fact that once you want to play it wirelessly, you are able to unplug it and use it as if it's its own like standalone headset, which I think is pretty cool. I have the Oculus Quest 2. I will say there is an extremely noticeable graphical downgrade on a lot of these games. Like if you're playing them on your PC and then you go to the Oculus Quest 2 version, it's kind of like jumping from the PS2 to the PS4. It really is that big of a jump sometimes in terms of graphics, and that can be a little jarring, but the fact that you're in the virtual world and the controls work exactly the same sort of makes up for it. And also the Oculus Quest 2 is overall cheaper than the PSVR 2. And it looks like Sony is paying attention to this competition though, because they've basically said that they are already working on a wireless version of the PlayStation VR 2. They're just trying to figure out how to deal with the performance of that. And honestly, I don't understand what the challenge is there, because the Oculus Quest 2, I know I'm going to keep bringing it up in this video, has already figured this out, and I'm pretty sure they had it figured out at launch. So if you have a 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi router, you can basically connect your Oculus Quest 2 to your PC wirelessly and cast your VR games to the headset. And you know, one of the biggest issues with VR games is that any latency will basically make you motion sick, but they do a really good job streaming the games on your own home network from your PC to the actual headset, like using 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. The difference is almost imperceivable. You do get a little bit of blocky texture sometimes, and sometimes the game will pause on its own, but like other than that, it is a pretty good experience. And obviously the upside there is that you are getting the full-fledged graphics of your main gaming PC on your headset versus using the Oculus Quest 2's native game, which like I just said, look a lot worse. This is definitely a tricky subject too for Sony, because the PSVR 2 is so expensive that like, yeah, if they came out with that and then 6 months later they came out with a true wireless version that was able to connect to the PS5 wirelessly and use your Wi-Fi router to stream the games to the headset and not need that cable, and it was the same price, I think that would probably cause a huge uproar from fans, because like, let's be honest, this thing's not going to be a one-to-one seller with the PlayStation 5. It's going to find a very dedicated, very niche fan base that really loves it, like we saw with the PlayStation Vita. And those people, when you kind of go against them, it makes them feel like they're being spat on, because they're sitting there like, well, I gave you $550 when no one else did, and now you're treating me like crap by coming out with a brand new headset 6 months down the line that costs the same price. I beta tested this thing for you, and I feel like I should have waited. And honestly, I don't feel like that's an unreasonable thing for them to say. Thankfully, it looks like Sony is just still in the research phase of this, and if they ever do release a wireless version of the PSVR 2, it'll be at least a year or so down the line. And the last news story I have for you guys today is that it looks like we're going to be getting yet another piece of PlayStation hardware within the next year or so, and it might be a streaming stick a la the one that Xbox basically announced and then canceled. So if you guys watched the channel before, you know I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of streaming games. I just don't like the latency. I don't like the blocky textures. I think PlayStation as a whole has an issue with streaming PS3 games going all the way down to PS2 games. They just don't look or run well over the internet. And those are old games. So the idea of streaming new games like PS5 games, it's just not something I'm interested in, just because I'm always at home, and when I'm not, I have my Steam Deck and I can play pretty much every Sony game I want to play on that device, because the newest games I want to play on my OLED at home with great speakers and my DualSense and my good lighting. I don't need it on a handheld. But PS4 games like Death Stranding Director's Cut, yeah, I could play that on a handheld like the Steam Deck. But I can definitely see why some people enjoy streaming games to their phone, and I gotta be real, at the Game Awards, I was able to test out Samsung's new system where you can stream Xbox games like Xbox Game Pass to your actual Samsung TV. All you need to do is connect an Xbox Series controller to your TV, and you can play it like it's an Xbox. And honestly, it was a really good experience. My buddy Ray, who you've seen on the channel all the time, he played the training shooting gallery in Halo Infinite, and he had no issue popping off headshots. There was literally one time when he was using it when it got blocky, but it never really got latency when he was playing the game, and it was overall a really cool experience. And the cool thing about those Samsung TVs is that they're not locked to Xbox. You can stream with a bunch of different game streaming apps to those TVs, so I can see why Sony would want to have an app of their own that they can add to their own TVs, because they love doing stuff like that. As far as a streaming stick goes, I feel like if this does come out, it will take a while and it will be very cheap. They learned their lesson with the PS Vita TV, I want to say, just because, man, that thing was a massive failure. They basically sold it as a little bit of like a Netflix box that can stream PS3 games and play PSP and PS Vita games. And yeah, like I said, it was an abysmal failure. I'm pretty sure it didn't even come with a controller, so you needed to pair one of your PlayStation 4 controllers or use a DualShock 3 with it. It was just a big mess. I hope we don't see a streaming stick. I don't think Sony needs to invest resources into that, but as much as I'm not a huge fan of streaming games, I feel like having an app on Samsung TVs or Sony TVs would be a pretty cool thing in the long run.